Hey everyone, it's Leo. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This letter was put on Reddit, and that's where I found it. So I want to give credit to that Reddit poster. But what I think some people might have glossed over is that this ties into what I was talking about with synthetic share creation, and Fidelity is essentially admitting that inadvertently. But let's go ahead and dive in here. So I'm going to zoom in so we can read this a little bit better because I imagine some people on smartphones and stuff might have some trouble. So essentially, this is Fidelity pushing back against SEC's new rule filings, but they're wanting to uh, change the requirements regarding shorts, specifically the reporting requirements. So just right off the bat, Fidelity says the SEC should exclude short positions from the proposed rule. Okay, so then later on, this is the important part, in my opinion. The inclusion of short positions in the required reporting under the proposed rule would be inappropriate from a securities market perspective, as well as potentially misleading, as it could result in inaccurate double counting of loans and will create confusion in the market. How does this tie in? Well, I think there is some confusion as within the community as to what's going on. But if we come over to the what I was talking about with these synthetic shares, the way this is working is buyer John wants to buy his shares, right? He goes to his broker, TD Ameritrade, whoever it may be. They place that order. They then go to the market maker. He naked short sells them those shares what he does not have, right? With the promise that he will repay them. So then what does he do? T plus 2 comes around and an FTD is generated. How does he get rid of that FTD? Well, he goes to the DTC and then they dip into the vault that holds everyone's shares. But so they, to be a little more technical, they go to specifically within the vault where Fidelity is holding their shares. So they're holding their client shares in the vault. They have a digital entitlement to that share. And then they're borrowing those shares to give to buyer John. But the market maker never returns those shares. And meanwhile, Fidelity is earning interest on those shares. Now, what happens to those shares once they're borrowed and given to John? Well, it goes right back into the vault and it repeats the cycle. So Fidelity is earning interest on shares that have already been loaned out, and those same shares have been loaned out again and again and again. It's like they're earning multiple layers of interest on the same exact shares, and this is how a synthetic share ends up being created. It's a duplicate share within the it's a loophole within the DTC processing system. So why do they not want it exposed? Inaccurate double counting of loans. It's funny that they use the word loan there and not shares, because they know that everybody would be up in roars if they said shares. It's it's really comical, to be honest. You know, they're basically sitting here and saying to the SEC, I think you should take a look at that again. It might expose the inaccurate double counting. Might potentially upset some people. Yeah, well, that's because you're basically taking out you're you're loaning people's shares multiple times over. It's the mortgage-backed securities crisis all over again. Synthetic CDO of a synthetic CDO of a synthetic CDO. It's the same thing, except this is synthetic share of synthetic share, synthetic share of synthetic share. Meanwhile, the brokers, what's the advantage to them? Well, they're earning interest. They're earning interest in their DTC account that's paid by the market maker because he was the original borrower who needed to fulfill that transaction. It's the same thing all over again. And they just admitted it within this article. I don't think people really caught that. I think they saw that it was important, and they saw that the SEC, Fidelity is proposing that the SEC will exclude it, so they don't have to report the shares. They don't have to report naked shorts, the shorting that's going on. They don't want it exposed. It's clear as day. Inaccurate double counting of loans. What loans? They're talking about the loans that are being loaned out through the DTC stock borrow program over and over again. But it's just comical to me. It really is. So another thing that's really interesting that's going on with Citadel is first they had the cash injection, the 1.15 billion, I believe it was, which is interesting. But what's more interesting is before, if we go wind the clock back a little bit, they also had restricted investor withdrawals significantly. Now, I don't recall exactly what they restricted it, but I want to say it was either going to take a year or like 4 years or something like that for an investor to completely withdraw their money, which is just absurd. I mean, it's very strange. So they're with restricting investor withdrawals. They're getting a cash injection from the I can't think of the name, Sequoia, I think it is, something like that. And then they're doing an IPO. What do all three of these things have in common? Well, they have to do with controlling the amount of cash they have. They don't want people pulling cash, right? Because that depletes cash. They don't want, or they wanted a cash injection, and now they're wanting an IPO. Why do they want an IPO? Well, it generates money for them because they do an initial public offering. They sell off shares in the market. Now, as to why they need that cash, could be any number of reasons. I can't really speculate as to why they need it. It could be that they're over leveraged and they're needing capital to not get margin called. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But it's interesting. The one thing I think we can take away from it is that they're cashing up for something. Whether it's, I wouldn't say that it's to pay people. That's one thing. That's one speculation I would say is that I don't think they're cashing up to be able to pay people because they don't care. If they default, then it's not their problem anymore, and it goes on to the prime brokers, and then eventually it goes on to the treasury. So it's just not their issue. They're not worried about trying to, well, it's going to collapse, so let's collect as much money as we possibly can so we can pay them. That's not really what's going on, in my opinion. It's more so that they're trying to, either they have some big business deal they're trying to do behind the scenes, or they're trying to prevent margin call. That's possible. They aren't getting one right now necessarily, but they could foresee one in the near future, and they're trying to cash up a little bit to be prepared for that. They could be preparing. There's just so many things that they could be wanting to use the cash for, but it's interesting that there's now 3 different things they've done regarding cash, needing cash. So it's very interesting to me. I think that pretty much wraps up this video. There's really not a whole lot to talk about as far as technical analysis goes. It's basically just moved sideways since yesterday. We're just waiting for a break in price. But anyway, until next time, I'll talk to y'all soon.